Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Have you ever thought, well, what would it have been like to be Mary, the mother of Jesus? I mean, don't you think she was faced with some fairly unique challenges? Today, of course, is Mother's Day, and we honor moms, and we recognize them, and every pastor I know approaches this day with a certain level of fear. Because at our own peril, we would forget this day, but we recognize as well the risk of talking about mothers on Mother's Day, because not all women are mothers. And even those that are, some have really struggled at being mothers. This is one of those bittersweet days. And yet, it's a day of almost national prominence. I mean, it's like one of our high holy days. Do you realize today, Hallmark says this is the third largest greeting card given day in the year. 150 million cards will be given today. It's a lot. And that the average price of a gift for a mother is $105. Which only means that my sons are bringing that average way down. More phone calls being made today than any other single day of the year. And yesterday, the day before Mother's Day, that Saturday, is the most popular day for cars to get washed. I have no idea what the connection is between those two, but there you have it. We are recognizing that moms are important. They bring us in the world, but then they teach us. Dads do too, and grandparents. But moms, in a very unique way, teach us what it takes to go through the different stages of life, from infancy to childhood, and then they help us survive adolescence. Nobody gets through adolescence really well, but moms are there to kind of help us, and then we get into adulthood. But they still continue to teach us. Leanne, my wife, and I, we both have our moms still alive. Leanne's mom, like Ruth, is 94 years old. My mom is 89. And they're still teaching us how to grow old with grace. And so we are so honoring of our moms today. And moms are important in shaping our faith, our Christian faith. I was talking with a pastor friend of mine, and he told me a story about one Sunday, the Sunday school kids were up front of the church, and they're doing a pageant of sorts, telling the story of Jesus. And one mom was sitting in the front row, and she had a little 6-year-old son who had some prominent roles to play in this pageant. And at one point, he got stuck. He just lost his place. He didn't know what the next words were. So mom in the front row was mouthing the words and whispering loudly, "I am the light of the world." And the little boy said, "My mom is the light of the world." And to him, she probably was. And I suspect that Jesus would have felt similarly about his mother Mary. And yet everything seemed to change in this story you heard read a few moments ago. This wedding that takes place in Cana. A phenomenal moment in Jesus' life, yes, but also in Mary's. Now, they're there for a wedding, and the weddings in those days would go on for 7 days. And so if you were responsible for the catering of a wedding, you had to make sure that you could feed people for 7 days, and people would come from all over. And the worst possible thing that could ever happen is that you would run out of wine. Well, they ran out of wine right in the middle of the wedding ceremony. And we're not entirely sure why they ran out of wine, but John, the gospel writer, is fantastic. He gives us these little details, and we're kind of encouraged to fill in the pieces. And one possible scenario that they ran out of wine, did you catch that? John slips in that Jesus is there, and he brought his disciples. Now, another place in the gospel, there's a luring mention of Jesus' disciples as wine bibers. So it's entirely possible that the reason they ran out of wine is that Jesus' disciples enjoyed themselves too much. And so this story opens up, and there comes a fascinating moment when Mary then steps up and takes charge. She becomes responsible for the whole wedding. Now, we don't know. Maybe she's the wedding coordinator. Or maybe she's related to the bride or to the groom. But she takes responsibility. She steps up and takes action. And she goes to her son and she says to him, they ran out of wine. Now, Jesus' response is oftentimes felt to be less than enduring. People read what Jesus says and they sometimes feel like Jesus is a little harsh with his mom, as if to say, hey lady, why is that my problem? But in the original language, in Greek, that's not what's going on at all. Jesus is being very polite, and he is simply saying, ma'am, I'm not entirely sure why that's my responsibility. But Mary knows better. Mary believes in her son. I think that's what moms oftentimes do. They believe in their kids. They believe in the potential of their children. They believe in the possibility of their kids. They don't believe everything their kids tell them. No parent would ever do that. We all know kids stretch the truth, right? But a good mom will believe in the potential of her children. You know, when everyone else says, you can't do that, it's moms who generally say, but I think you can. But I think you can. Teachers in our church will tell us what studies have been indicating for years consistently, that parents, moms and dads, who take an active interest in their kids and their educational pursuits, who hold them accountable, who have high expectations of them, those kids will end up doing really well in school. You see, moms are deeply important as people who know the possibility and the potential of their children, and they will do everything in their power to help those kids live according to those potentials. Mary certainly knew that there was something very different about her son. She didn't know entirely all the possibility and all the potential, but she knew that this son is different. I mean, after all, first of all, there was an angel who showed up when she was pregnant to tell her so. That's unique. But if that's not enough, then wise men and other angels and shepherds show up when Jesus is born. Mary's astute enough to know this doesn't happen to other people's kids when they're born. And there was that time then when Jesus is just 12 years old, and they find him in the temple, and he's teaching the teachers of the law. No, Mary understands. Jesus is quite something. There is something significant about him. And she knows enough at this critical moment to invite Jesus to step forward and to then discover his potential. And then Mary does something really awesome. She tells the servants that they ought to listen to whatever Jesus says and to do what he asks. And then she steps out. Then she just simply steps away and lets Jesus do what Jesus needs to do at that moment. Mary doesn't do Jesus' work for him. Mary doesn't rescue Jesus. Mary steps aside. Maybe you've heard the term helicopter parents. Those are parents that have the proclivity of involving themselves in their children's lives at such an intensity that their identity is lost into the identity of their children, and that oftentimes happens long after the kids move out of the house. Newsweek a couple of years ago did an expose on helicopter parents, and they chronicled the life of one particular mom. And she has two sons, and they're both in college, and they go to college on separate ends of the United States. But this mom stays in hourly contact with her kids. Every day, she sends them an email of the things that they need to do. And she proofreads their papers, and she does their laundry, and she balances their checkbooks, and she does all of these things as if to say, I don't think you can live your life on your own. I don't trust you. So I'll live your life through me. But Mary doesn't do that. Mary steps back. And she lets Jesus do what he needs to do. But an important point. We're not told in the Bible what Mary's reaction and feelings were at that moment. Maybe Mary had some significant fear going on inside of her, wondering, I wonder what my son's going to do. What happens if he tries something here and falls flat on his face? We don't know. But I know well enough that most parents have those levels of fear for their kids. I mean, no parent ever wants to see their child fail. It hurts us when we see our kids struggle with things. When we see our kids work hard towards something and don't come out with the hope of the end in mind that they wanted to begin with. And in a lot of ways, we've created a culture that has saved kids from failing. I mean, to a large extent, we have a culture where all kids win. Kids are playing sports and they're all provided trophies, or every kid gets a smiley face on their paper, or all kids get honorable mentions. I mean, that's kind of the culture that has been established for us. But kids need to fail. Does that sound strange? And not only do kids need to fail, but adults need to fail as well. It's only when we fail that we begin to learn some pretty powerful lessons in life. I mean, how you fail, how often you fail, why you fail, those are important questions that all of us need to wrestle with so that we can gain some sense of what it means for us to discover personal effectiveness and personal success. Did you know? Thomas Edison failed 6,000 times at finding the right filament for the light bulb. 6,000 times. And when he was asked about that level of failure, he once said, I did not fail 6,000 times. I found 6,000 reasons that the light bulb won't work. The hardest thing for any parent to do is to step back and to let our kids, young or old, make mistakes and fail. But it's what happens next that's most important. It's that follow-up, where moms and dads and grandparents and all who care about these individuals then come into that vacuum after the failure. And to say, you know what? We still love you. And we do believe in you. And even though you have failed, it doesn't make you a failure. And so Jesus gets to work. And he is effective. He turns water into wine. And not just a little bit of wine. 180 gallons of wine. And not just cheap wine from Arkansas or Missouri or Temecula. But good wine, like from Napa County or the Bordeaux region. I mean, the finest of wine Jesus makes. And the gospel writer John says something interesting. He said, this is the first sign of Jesus. Isn't that interesting? This is the first sign of Jesus. What is John telling us? How many signs, according to John's gospel, does Jesus do? Well, if we read through the gospel, we find that he did 6 signs. This is the first one, and John lists them out. Why would John do that? What's his purpose? What is he doing? But let me ask you a question. Can you think of anywhere else in the Bible where the number 6 is really important, then followed by the number of 7, which is really important? Hopefully you're thinking back to the book of Genesis, to creation. The 6 days that it took God to create, and then on the 7th day when God rested. I think that John is telling us that just like in Genesis, God is doing a new creation at this moment. And Jesus is at the center of this new creation. And the first sign is like the first day of creation. On the first day of creation, God says, let there be light. And the first sign in this new creation is showing that Jesus is the light of the world. And when in Genesis it says that God began to bring things into being that weren't there before, all there was before was chaotic water. In the same way, John is telling us that Jesus is taking water and he is making something extraordinarily good, new, and abundant. And I tell you all of this because at the back of this story, underneath it all, is Mary. She's the one who got this moment going. Mary's the one who initiates the first sign in the unfolding of her son's spiritual purpose and identity. And you see, I think that's true for moms as well. Moms, not alone, dads take the responsibility too, but moms carry the responsibility for the unfolding of their child's faith. Make no mistake, parents who don't have a solid faith will raise kids who don't have a solid faith. And it gets even more pointed when reflected upon moms. Moms, even more than dads, have the greatest impact on the beginning stages of children's faith. And Mary makes the move. And Mary has her imprint upon Jesus' life. And now Jesus begins to show himself as the Messiah that soon he would be fully known as. And my last reflection on this passage today is probably a difficult passage or reflection to end with. In fact, it's not even referenced in John chapter 2 at all. But after Mary leaves Jesus with the servants, and they're filling the water into the jugs, we don't hear again from Mary until the very end of the Gospel of John. It's not until the 19th chapter in John that Mary makes her second and final appearance, and she does so at a crushing moment. She is standing at the foot of the cross, and she is watching her son die. Mary suffers as her child suffers. Isn't that true for any parent who has had to see their children struggle? Often moms suffer for their children. And for those who have had to suffer the premature death of a child, they know that a little bit of them dies when their children die. Last week I did a funeral for a woman of middle age, and it was painful because she left behind 3 adult daughters. But it was even more painful for her 80-year-old mother, who never thought that she would have to carry the burden of burying one of her own children. But it isn't just death that takes a bite out of a mom's life, or a dad's. I mean, there are hundreds of ways that parents suffer for their children. Last weekend, I was at our church's Synod Assembly, and I ran into the mother of a friend of mine. Now, I had not seen this guy in more than 10 years, and so when I saw his mom, I said, "How's your son doing? What's he up to this day?" And she looked down at the ground, and she said, "We haven't spoken to him in a number of years. He has cut off contact with all of his brothers and sisters and with myself. I haven't heard from him in 3 years." In pain. Lots and lots of pain. Moms struggle, as do dads, as do grandparents, when children stop talking to them, or when they lose a job, or when they drop out of college, or when they make bad marriage decisions, or when they get into trouble with the law, or when they choose lifestyles in conflict with family values, or when they stop going to church. And most moms, they don't wear that disappointment and that struggle on their sleeves, but you scratch just a little bit below the surface, and the wound is there, and the wound is deep. And so I mentioned that the Gospel of John is meant to parallel the book of Genesis and the creation account found there. In Genesis, there are 6 days of creation. The 6th day is the creation of humanity. The 6th sign in the Gospel of John is the raising of Lazarus from the dead. And John, I think, is telling us that Jesus is making a new humanity, and it has something to do with new life. And then comes the 7th day. And as God rested on the 7th day in Genesis, now Jesus rests in the tomb. Death and the devil, they have done their worst. Pain and suffering has never been so intense. Confusion and fear have enveloped the disciples. But something is happening below the surface. A new day, it's about to break. It's going to be a day when there is no more pain and suffering. It'll be a day when death doesn't have the final word. It'll be a new day when Jesus will rule in the hearts and the lives of every single person who ever lived. A new day is coming. And the ultimate hope of every mom, of every dad, of every grandparent, of everyone who has ever laid awake at night and worried about their children or their grandchildren or their family as a whole, is that God is leading us to this new day. It will be a day where His will is done and where His kingdom is fulfilled. And there won't be any more tears, and there will be no more death, and there will be no more darkness, and there will be no suffering for you or for your children. Because no matter how great your mom is, it is Jesus, Mary's Son, the Son of God, who He alone is the light of the world forever. Amen. The peace of the Lord be with you always. Thank you. I invite you to rise and share the peace of Christ with those who are near you.